You're with us as we take a significant deep dive today, looking into the passing of Pope Francis.
Mhm.
It's news that's really resonated, hasn't it, all across the world, prompting this look back at his leadership, his time heading the Catholic Church, and, well, the impact he had.
A profound impact, certainly.
Absolutely. And we've gathered quite a range of sources for this deep dive news reports, covering the immediate events, official statements from the Vatican, world leaders, and even some of those initial reactions popping up on social media.
Right, gives a broad picture.
Our goal today really is to try and grasp the core of Pope Francis's legacy. We'll do that by digging into the information we have, the sources you shared, and those first global responses to his death.
Exactly. So let's start with the immediate aftermath. Pope Francis passed away this morning, April 21st, 2025. It was 7:35 a.m. Rome time.
All right.
The official announcement came from Cardinal Kevin Farrell. He's the Camerlengo, which means he's essentially the caretaker of the church in this period between popes. A very crucial role right now.
Right, the interim period.
Precisely. And Cardinal Farrell described the Pope's life as one, well, completely dedicated to serving the Lord and his church.
It's really striking, isn't it, that just the day before, Easter Sunday, he made what turned out to be his final public appearance outside the Vatican. Several sources pointed that out.
It makes it incredibly poignant, yeah.
A final greeting, almost.
It really does feel that way. And almost immediately, the tributes started pouring in, political leaders from all over, which really underscores the kind of influence he had globally. You had Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, for instance, really emphasizing the Pope's focus on the most vulnerable people in society.
Okay.
Then Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk shared a photo with him, remembering Pope Francis as kind, warm, and compassionate.
A lot of warmth mentioned early on.
Definitely. And the Dutch Prime Minister, Dick Schoof, he described him as, in every way, a man of the people.
You can almost see a theme emerging right away in these initial reactions, can't you?
Absolutely.
The sense of connection to ordinary people, concern for those on the margins.
Exactly. And King Charles III from the UK also expressed his sadness. He recalled meeting him just earlier in April, actually.
Oh, right.
And he acknowledged the Pope's compassion, his work towards Christian unity, that tireless effort on shared global challenges, and, significantly, his deep belief in caring for creation.
That environmental aspect was key for Francis.
Very much so. King Charles even noted that Pope Francis had shared an Easter greeting just before.
Wow. The repetition of words like compassion is quite noticeable, isn't it?
It really is. It suggests that maybe beyond just political viewpoints, leaders recognize this fundamental humanism in him. Maybe speaks to a global desire for that kind of empathetic leadership.
Perhaps. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also spoke about his courageous leadership, but rooted in humility, and called him a pope for the poor and downtrodden.
Very much echoing that theme. And French President Emmanuel Macron highlighted how he brought joy and hope, particularly to the poorest, and worked to unite people, not just with each other, but also with nature.
It's quite remarkable seeing that consistency across such different leaders.
It really speaks to the breadth of his influence.
Yeah. And even Israeli President Isaac Herzog, he acknowledged the strong ties Pope Francis fostered with the Jewish community.
Right, the interfaith dialogue was important.
And President Herzog also mentioned his hopes for peace in the Middle East, the return of hostages, and he referenced the Pope's final Easter message.
Which noted the worrying rise in anti-Semitism.
Exactly. It just shows his engagement with really tough current global issues right up to the end.
And this brings up an interesting point about, the nature of his influence. Even Argentine President Javier Milei.
With whom he famously had differences, right?
Exactly. Even Milei, while acknowledging those differences, offered his farewell as president, as an Argentine, and as a man of faith, recognizing the Pope's, quote, goodness and wisdom.
That's quite something.
It is. And then you have Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese describing him as close to the Australian people, a devoted champion, a loving father figure for Australian Catholics. His reach was truly global.
Continent to continent, across the political spectrum. The consistent use of words like compassion, humility, focus on the poor, it really paints this picture of a core identity that just resonated so widely.
It does.
So, okay, let's shift focus a bit. Let's dive into how Pope Francis is described as having, well, fundamentally reshaped the church itself. Some sources use really strong language like tectonic shift.
That phrase comes up, yes. And he was certainly a man of many firsts. First from the Americas, first from the Southern Hemisphere, first Jesuit pope.
Loyalist.
And his papacy was marked by what many saw as a more compassionate, maybe a more pastoral approach to difficult issues like homosexuality and contraception, and crucially, a real openness to women in leadership roles.
And there were concrete examples of that, weren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Specific appointments really underscore this. You had Barbara Giada becoming director of the Vatican Museums.
Right.
Sister Natalie Beckart appointed as undersecretary to the Synod of Bishops, significantly becoming the first woman with voting rights there.
Which is a huge deal in terms of actual governance participation.
A massive development, yes. And Sister Raffaella Petrini, appointed Secretary General, then later promoted within the governorate of Vatican City State. These weren't just symbolic. That voting right in the Synod is a tangible change.
Definitely. And Massimo Faggioli made a point, didn't he, that under Francis, discussing things like gender inclusivity in the church was, well, it was no longer forbidden territory.
Exactly. The dialogue shifted. That in itself is significant.
A big change in just the level of openness. And beyond gender, he also brought in representation quite dramatically in the College of Cardinals.
He did. 163 cardinals appointed for 76 different countries. And for 25 of those countries, it was their first ever cardinal.
Wow.
That clearly shows a deliberate push, a focus on Catholic communities outside Europe, often in underserved regions.
So if you connect that, the broader College of Cardinals, with the increased influence he gave the Synod of Bishops and throwing in the women's voting rights,
you see a pattern, right? Decentralization, broader inclusion. Thomas Worcester observed that Francis actively tried to replace what he called clerical careerism.
like climbing the church ladder.
Kind of, yeah. Replacing that with a model where clergy and lay people focus more on imitating Christ in their service.
Okay.
And Catherine Clifford built on that, describing his whole synodal approach as challenging that traditional separation between clergy and laity, pushing towards co-responsibility, shared responsibility.
It really does sound like he was aiming for reform in both structure and mindset.
Yeah.
And this focus on the marginalized on the global south, that seems absolutely central to his legacy.
It appears to be a defining aspect, yes. The sources consistently point to this greater attention beyond Europe, the concern for poverty in the developing world.
We even saw faith leaders in Minnesota calling him a voice for the voiceless.
A powerful description. And his stances weren't always easy. His criticisms of Israel's wartime conduct, his call for an investigation into genocide allegations, which Israel denied, certainly put him in a distinct, sometimes controversial spot globally.
Mm-hmm.
In his defense of immigrants and refugees, it was relentless, unwavering, widely recognized.
Michael Sean Winters linked these political positions back to a core belief Francis articulated in Fratelli Tutti, didn't he? Something like,
A politics that doesn't start with compassion will always be misguided.
yes. That really provides a lens, a framework for understanding why he engaged with these often difficult issues.
It shows how his theology, his pastoral concerns directly shaped his views on social justice and global politics. It's all interconnected. And we absolutely have to include environmental stewardship in that interconnected picture.
Definitely. King Charles specifically mentioned how Francis's belief in caring for creation resonated so deeply.
As a fundamental expression of faith, yes.
It's clear that was a major focus, and it got widespread attention and, frankly, a lot of support.
Hugely important part of his legacy. Now, let's talk about his connection with ordinary people. That seems to be a real hallmark.
It does. Michael Sean Winters highlighted his knack for communicating effectively, even with people who maybe aren't steeped in theology or academia.
Reaching people where they are. And Catherine Clifford pointed to the bold gesture of choosing the name Francis itself.
Right. Immediately invoking St. Francis of Assisi.
Exactly. Linking his papacy right from the start to simplicity, service to the poor. That radical commitment.
And then there was that incredibly moving story about his visit to the Regina Coeli prison shortly before he died.
Yes.
And him asking that question. Every time I come here, I ask myself, why them and not me?
Powerful.
The reactions to that online, like on Reddit, people really felt that showed his profound and deeply rooted humanity.
Those online discussions, while informal, they do give you a window into the public's gut reaction, especially among Catholics.
Yeah.
A lot of sadness, naturally. People sharing prayers like eternal rest grant unto him, many personal stories about how he'd impacted them. And the timing, passing away just after Easter, held a lot of significance for people.
It felt symbolic to many.
It did. And interestingly, There were condolences from people of other faiths, too, acknowledging his work building bridges, for instance, with Muslim leaders. That speaks volumes about his interreligious efforts.
It really shows that personal connection resonated incredibly powerfully, far and wide. Okay, so procedure now. Following the Pope's death, there's a very established process. Can you walk us through that?
Certainly. The immediate phase is a period of mourning within the Church. We also know Pope Francis expressed a specific wish to be buried in the Basilica of St. Mary Major.
Which is different, isn't it? Usually it's the Vatican grottos.
It's a notable departure, yes. After the mourning period comes the conclave. That's the election of the next pope. It typically happens within 15 to 20 days of the pope's death.
Okay.
All eligible cardinals gather in the Sistine Chapel. It's done by secret ballot.
Very traditional, very secret.
They need a two-thirds majority to elect a new pope.
Okay.
And the whole world watches that chimney.
For the smoke signals, white smoke means success.
And black smoke means no decision yet. Given the significance, Rome's obviously expecting huge crowds. That can pose some logistical challenges for the city.
You'd imagine so. A truly historic and somewhat mysterious process, that conclave. And naturally, the talk has already turned to potential successors.
Inevitably.
Whoever is elected inherits a church significantly shaped by Francis's appointments.
That's a crucial point. Ulrich Lehner suggested that maybe Pope Francis's style, sometimes deciding without wide consultation, might have perhaps inadvertently complicated relationships among the cardinal electors. Made it harder for them to know each other well.
Interesting perspective.
But Christina Traina offers a counterpoint. She notes that the sheer number of cardinals Francis appointed, over 100 eligible voters, could very well mean his successor will continue prioritizing the directions he set.
The numbers might favor continuity.
It's a strong possibility.
So who are some of the names being floated, the potential frontrunners?
Well, one name you hear very often is Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle from the Philippines.
Okay.
He's generally seen as aligned with Francis's, let's say, progressive vision. Strong on inclusion, evangelization. He has Vatican experience, worked closely with Francis.
And his background, Asian heritage.
Exactly. Former Archbishop of Manila. Given the Church's growth in Asia, that's seen as significant.
Another name that comes up a lot is Cardinal Pietro Parolin from Italy.
Yes, the Vatican Secretary of State since 2013. So immense experience in administration, diplomacy. He's often seen as more of a moderate figure.
Could offer stability, perhaps?
That's the thinking. Stability while potentially upholding some of Francis's reforms.
Then there's Cardinal Peter Erdu from Hungary mentioned, too.
Yes. He might represent a potential shift towards a more conservative direction, maybe more in line with the papacies before Francis.
A different path.
Potentially. And finally, Cardinal Angelo Scola, also Italian.
His name has come up before in previous conclaves, hasn't it?
It has. He's generally viewed as more traditionalist, maybe favoring a more centralized church structure. So you see, there's quite a range of possibilities and different potential directions.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together then. We've taken this deep dive into Pope Francis's passing. Looking at the immediate global shockwaves, the really significant ways he reshaped the church, that intense focus on the marginalized, on the environment, his very personal connection with people, then the procedures now unfolding and this early talk about who might come next, it really does feel like the end of that tectonic shift.
It does, doesn't it? His papacy brought substantial reforms, a very distinctive style. It's undoubtedly left a lasting mark. This upcoming conclave is going to be absolutely crucial in seeing whether the church continues down the path he charted or, well, changes course.
Right. So for you, the listener, as you mull over everything we've discussed today, here's a final thought to take away. Considering all these diverse reactions, the ongoing debates about the church's future, what single aspect of Pope Francis's legacy do you think will prove the most enduring? And how might that specific aspect influence who the cardinals choose next and what the priorities of the next pope might be? Think about all those different facets, the social reforms, the global outreach, that particular leadership style as you reflect on this really significant moment.